Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Drop-In, essential conversations about business now, a four-part series presented by Wired Brand Lab and Dropbox, exploring the challenges, triumphs, and above all, the realities of this new world of work. I'm Guy Raz, and on these episodes, I'll be talking with entrepreneurs and other business leaders about how they're adapting their practices and their outlooks in response to these uncertain times. How we work may never be the same, but our innovative guests will offer proof that with a little creative thinking and a lot of flexibility, there's always a way to optimize and evolve. In this episode, I'm talking with Sal Khan, the founder of the nonprofit Khan Academy. It's a free platform that offers hundreds of recorded lessons in math, science, the humanities, and more in dozens of languages, something that certainly came in handy as schools across the world began closing down in March. Sal will walk us through what it's like to grow a business to accommodate a very real-time need. Sal Khan, welcome. It's great having you.
Great to be here, Guy.
So your backstory is incredible. I mean, you went to Harvard Business School, you were in the finance world working in hedge funds. How did this whole Khan Academy thing even begin?
If you go all the way back to 2004, as you mentioned, I was working as an analyst at a hedge fund. I was a year out of business school. I had just gotten married, and I had family visiting me from New Orleans, which is where I was born and raised. And they were visiting me in Boston after my wedding. And it just came out of conversation that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble in math. I told her, hey, Nadia, when you go back to New Orleans, how about I tutor you? She was up for it. So she goes back, I get on the phone, we start using instant messenger, whatever we could to be able to communicate with each other. And slowly but surely, she got caught up with her class, got a little bit even ahead of her class. I was kind of hooked. I started working with her younger brothers, and then word spread in my family that free tutoring was going on. And before I knew it, there were 10, 15 cousins, family, friends that I was tutoring. And my original background was in software, and I was always fascinated by, well, maybe there's some things that I could help my cousins with. And I saw that they all had gaps in their knowledge. And so if I could write a little software problem practice thing that they could get practice, I as their tutor could keep track of it. And that was the first Khan Academy. It had nothing to do with videos. And then in 2006, I was showing off this crazy family project that I had for my family. And a friend of mine suggested, well, this is all cool, Sal, but how are you scaling your lessons? And I said, it's a good point. It's much harder to scale my lessons with 15 cousins than when I was only doing it with Nadia. And he recommended, well, why don't you record them as videos and upload them onto the internet for your family? And my initial reaction was, it's a horrible idea. Internet video, that's for dogs playing piano. Not for serious math. But I gave it a shot, and my cousins famously told me they liked me better on YouTube than in person. So I took that as positive feedback, and I kept going. And before I knew it, many tens of thousands of folks who were not my cousins were using the software, were using the videos on a regular basis, and I frankly just had trouble focusing on my day job. So I sat down with my wife Umama, and we looked at our finances. And we said, well, maybe this is something I could do for real. We could live off of savings for a little bit. And so that's when I took the plunge, set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit with a mission of providing a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere.
Sal, you graduated from MIT with 3 majors and a master's degree. You were on the fast track at that point in your life to make endless pots of money, but clearly you weren't happy. I mean, it wasn't bringing you joy. I mean, am I right about that?
I wasn't miserable in my old job. My hedge fund job, I actually enjoyed it a good bit. It was very intellectually stimulating.
Yeah.
But I did always rationalize, even when I was doing the hedge fund job, I was telling my friends, this is a good job. I like it. But one day I hope to have enough resources to start a school on my own terms. That was kind of how I imagined it. And all of a sudden it looked like, well, maybe this isn't a traditional school, but in a lot of ways I could reach millions or even billions of students. What could be better than that?
What was it about teaching that just got you super excited? How was it that you were so passionate about that?
I always enjoyed learning, and I always enjoyed trying to distill information. And to be able to apply this in a way that was useful to my family and that in the back of my mind I thought could be useful for a lot of folks was really interesting for me. And, at the end of the day, I think we all kind of enter into the universe looking around and saying, like, how do I make an impact to leave the universe better than when I showed up? And on almost any issue you look at, it really does boil down to education at the end of the day. So when I found an outlet for that, it was pretty satisfying.
Sal, as you know, I interview a lot of entrepreneurs, and I point to you again and again because I wish more entrepreneurs would look at your entrepreneurial story and be inspired to do what you do, because that has a vastly bigger impact on the world than a venture that is just about making a profit. You started Khan Academy deliberately as a non-profit. Why?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with for-profit. Obviously, my old job was as arguably as anything but for-profit when I worked at the hedge fund. And I live in Silicon Valley. I did have some venture capitalists, some angel investors come and say, "I'll write a check right now. We'll set it up as a for-profit." Meeting 1 was pretty intriguing, but then meeting 2 and 3, when we started talking about how to monetize it, how do you make the really valuable stuff sit behind a paywall or you put advertising, that's when it didn't feel so right, especially where every morning I was waking up and I was getting these letters from folks all over the world, most of whom would not have been able to access this material if it was not free, if it was behind some type of a paywall. And on top of that, my capitalist side of my brain, my hedge fund brain says, okay, Sal, just don't go with your heart. You have to have a good rational reason for being not for profit. And at the end of the day, I do believe in markets, but there's some places where markets either don't work well, and education's one of them because the buyer, the beneficiary, and the decision maker are all different people. Or even when they work, they might not lead to outcomes that are consistent with our values. And we know that, education is one of those places where we want everyone to have access regardless of their capability of paying. So you put all those things together, and I felt like, well, you live once, might as well try to do the most epic thing.
And by the way, I know that you believe in markets because I'm taking your finance course on Khan Academy right now, and it's excellent. So thank you very much for that. When you started to put these videos out, it was literally you doing screen recordings on your computer and giving lessons in algebra or basic math, and you were just generating these videos and putting them up there. How did people discover them? How did it grow from 0 to 1 to 1 million?
So once I started tutoring, making them for my cousins, and I saw my cousins were getting value, I started to say, well, let me just do all of algebra. Let me just do all of physics. And it was kind of like a crazy idea, but there's something about this modality. It's very evergreen, actually. And you do 5, 6, 7 videos a day, each of them 10 minutes long. Over the course of a year, you can actually cover like whole subject areas. So I think a lot of people on the internet, they might have jumped into one video, just finding it on search. That was the thing they needed help on. I'd like to believe that they felt it was very approachable. I think it was a blessing that some of that original content was from my cousins because I was very casual. I still am very casual in the videos. I talk exactly the way I'm talking now in the videos. And then the comprehensiveness of it, that you could keep going on Khan Academy. Even at the early days and learn all of algebra or learn a lot of, corporate finance. Some people have said it's viral. It was a very slow virality, or the original form of virality, which is word of mouth. It was a lot of people just telling other people, hey, this really helped me on my exam. You might want to check it out.
What did you discover about how kids or students using the material, about how they were learning?
In a traditional learning model, you're pushed ahead at a fixed pace. You get an 80% on a test. You get a C on your transcript, and then you never get a chance to improve that 20%. So that gap persists. Then the next unit, you have to build on those gaps. So you're more likely to have gaps, and they keep accumulating. And so you see what you observe in the world is a lot of kids. 70% of all kids who go to community college have to take essentially 6th or 7th grade math.
Wow.
And a lot of folks will say, oh, well, maybe these kids just aren't capable. But what my biggest learning was, if you give people the incentive, the motivation, and the opportunity to fill in those gaps, pretty much anyone can learn anything. And I always give the example, if you go 1,000 years back in time, most people thought reading was a very elite thing to be able to do. Only about 15 or 20% of the population back then was literate. But now we recognize that almost everyone is capable of reading. And part of my journey has been recognizing that some of these things that we consider to be elite right now understanding physics or finance or chemistry. Actually, I think almost everyone is capable of learning it if they're allowed to fill in their gaps, they're allowed to operate at their learning edge, it's approachable, it's fun, and they see that it's really just describing this mystery that we call the universe. I think every human being loves to engage in that.
It's an incredible story, Sal, because what began as, tutoring for your cousin grew into something that was educating 20 million people around the world every month. You had a school that you built, the Khan Lab School. You have created a staff and headquarters. And then we get to March of 2020 and COVID hits. Walk me through, with your team, what'd you do?
Yeah, obviously none of us could have foreseen the COVID crisis, but when it started to become clear that it might become relevant in the US and the rest of the world, it's one of those moments where you kind of look left and look right and say, I think this is going to be us, because people are going to need something that's accessible, that works in a classroom setting, works in an at-home setting, covers multiple subjects and grades. And so we started working with our team to see if we could handle more server load, et cetera. Started planning for training webinars for parents and teachers. And then, that week, I think it was the second or third week of March, we saw our traffic go from about 30 million learning minutes a day to about 85 million learning minutes a day.
Wow.
Pretty dramatic increase. And so we were just trying to keep up with that, support as many people as possible. And then it became clear that this was going to be a protracted distance learning situation.
Were you able to manage a distributed team fairly easily, or was it hard? I mean, even though, of course, you're, a digital organization, essentially a tech company, I imagine that there's still a lot of serendipity and a lot of creativity that happens in the office environment.
Yeah, and we're still trying to figure out what the right balance is between the in-person and leveraging remote work, even post-COVID. When we went into it, we were already about 30% of our team was distributed around the country and actually around the world. Even our headquarters down here in Mountain View, California, a lot of folks lived an hour away in San Francisco, so they would be in the office 3 or 4 days a week, not 5 days a week. So even pre-COVID, almost every meeting we had someone who was remote. So we were used to that. So that aspect of it, I think, was pretty seamless for us, at least. Now, what we found is you have certain team members that actually love it. They don't have a commute anymore. The switching costs between one meeting and the other is less. While a lot of folks find it very depleting. They really got a lot of energy out of seeing people, reading body language, the impromptu conversations at the water cooler. So, we actually, I was just had a team meeting earlier today where people were asking about what our long-term plans is. We're just trying to figure out what's been working for folks that we want to keep and what kind of things do we have to bring back in order to have a hopefully optimal workplace.
As a leader of an organization, not just the leader of a movement, are you constantly interrogating yourself and asking yourself, is this the right thing to do? Are we doing this the right way? Should we think about it in a different way? Are you kind of at maximum flexibility at all times?
I try to be, I'm sure there are things that I'm doing out of habit or that I'm so sure is right. But maybe if I took a step back, I might realize, well, maybe there's another way of doing that as well. So I always just like to keep a very, hopefully, Zen view. And it's not always that way. I definitely wake up in the middle of the night questioning some decisions or if I have a big decision to make. But for the most part, saying, okay, I made the decision. The die has been cast. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Sal, you are already quite an innovative organization because of what you do with digital learning, but I imagine that this year you have had to come up with new innovations because there have probably been demands, requests from schools asking for new content, different ways of engaging with students. So what are some of the things that you've started to build or think about building this year?
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. Just being able to support parents and teachers with training. How do you do distance learning? One of the big things we realized is, even pre-COVID, we've always preached that kids accumulate these gaps. They're all over the place. They need some ways to fill in those foundations. COVID was going to make, or is making that just that much worse, where some kids are continuing to learn and be quite engaged, while some kids, they might not even have proper internet access, or even if they do, they don't have the supports to engage. They're going to fall further and further behind. So one new resource we created, frankly, it's something we've always wanted to do, but COVID was the catalyst to say that we got to do this in a matter of months, is something called Get Ready for Grade Level courses, where we have the grade level things that students can learn at their own time and pace. But we know, and we've seen some teachers where they've seen that if they took kids who are behind grade level and just made them work on all their foundations, when they got to the grade level material, they're able to go through it much, much faster versus leaving those gaps on the foundations and then just trying to do grade level. You can take the course challenge, you get 90%, you're ready for sixth grade. You get a 40 or 50%, work on those units, work on those skills that you missed so that you can fill in all those Swiss cheese gaps so you'll be more ready for grade level content. This is important anytime, but especially in a time where kids' gaps are going to get even larger and larger and larger over time.
Sal, the Get Ready for the grade level series that you released and made available earlier this year, I think you created something like 18 courses in 6 weeks. First of all, how were you able to do that so quickly under the circumstances?
What I've realized, and actually this is something that maybe all entrepreneurs should appreciate, is there's a lot of crises, and sometimes you have forcing functions, and there's a famous saying, don't waste a crisis, but I also say don't waste a forcing function. If we were in normal times and I told the team, let's figure out a way that for every grade level, we are going to create ways to identify all the gaps, how ready someone is, I think the team would have naturally and probably prudently, reasonably said, hey, let us have several months to design this thing, think about how it could work out. By next school year, aggressively, we might be able to do this. But when you have the crisis and you have the forcing function of there's literally 50 million kids in America who are going to show up back at school in August. We need to do something in the next 6 weeks. The team was able to come up with a solution where, we did 18 courses in a matter of 6 weeks. Which would have seemed crazy pre-COVID, but the forcing function was a very valuable thing to kind of force that innovation.
How do you keep driving innovation when resources are constrained?
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate question, because there's a lot more innovation we need to do, and the resources are always constrained. I mean, we are not for profit, so if folks out there who want to donate, please do. So I'm a big fan of just seeing what you have in front of you, seeing if you can find some new permutation. And even if it feels a little bit kludgy, a little bit homebrew, try it out. I mean, that's how Khan Academy started, right? Everything I was doing, I was like, I guess we'll use instant messenger to communicate and a conference line. I guess I'll host these videos on YouTube. I guess, I'll make a little thing. It was whatever I had at my, I didn't have a budget in the early days. And so in some ways, some of the team members at Khan Academy said, Sal, I kind of see you've kind of a new energy in you during COVID. And I said, you're right. I kind of feel like 2010 Sal again, where I didn't have as much resources for all of the things that I want to do. And it does create a kind of fun energy.
Sal, I think that you've said that initially Khan Academy was sort of designed as a supplement for the classroom, but in recent months, it's sort of become more of an enterprise partner to schools and school districts. So how has that worked?
For us to really have the impact that we want to have, we need to reach all students, and not just the ones that are motivated to come for whatever reason. And so we started approaching districts, especially large public urban school districts, and say, look, here's the efficacy data, here's the implementation model, even 45 minutes a week makes a difference. And they said, well, look, we buy this. We agree with what you're saying, that this could grow our students. It fills in their gaps. We know that those gaps exist. This feels like a doable implementation model, but if you want us to do it systemically, you've got to give support, training, integration with our rostering systems, because every district is different. There's some bespoke work. You're doing a lot more kind of boots on the ground, so to speak, to do training. But you got to do what you got to do in order to have the impact that you hope. And, over the last 2 years, and obviously COVID has thrown a curveball, and maybe even a positive curveball, it's been really important work to do. We work with over 100 school districts formally, above and beyond the over 200,000 teachers who use us in a grassroots way. And that's where formally integrated with their systems. We're formally part of their curricula so that we can help kids fill in gaps and accelerate their learning.
I know that you have never been an advocate for digital-only learning. You've always said, look, there needs to be in-person learning. Khan Academy is a supplement. You can learn a lot from it, but you need to be there. Now we're not there. I mean, there are some kids who are going back to school little by little, but most kids aren't. Do you think that this year has accelerated this idea that digital is not going to be supplemental in the future, but actually the primary way that kids will learn?
I hope people don't somehow go to all digital. I think all 100% digital is suboptimal for most kids. I'm something of a poster child for online learning, and sometimes that's equated with distance learning. But I'll be the first to say, if I had to pick between an amazing teacher and amazing technology, I would pick the amazing teacher every time. Now, ideally, you don't have to make that trade-off. That you can say, okay, what does that amazing teacher need? Well, they need better ways to reach all of those 30 students in their class, make sure that they can fill in their gaps, ways to make, when they get together, more interactive. And so that's what we've always aspired for at Khan Academy, that if kids are able to work at their zone of proximal development, really their learning edge, fill in their gaps, teachers are able to monitor that. When they come into the classroom, or if you're in a COVID type situation and you have to do that on a video conference, when they come there, the teacher can use that time for more person-to-person interaction. Now, there are situations where there's parts of the world where kids don't have access to school, or don't have access to certain courses, or even in a lot of parts of the US, they might nominally have access to a course, but it's not really at a rigorous world-class level. Yes, there we think Khan Academy alone can help really raise the floor, so to speak. So we don't lose all of the good stuff that we had from in-person instruction, but we're able to augment that with a lot more powerful tools and frameworks.
With all of these new students onboarding and all of these schools really using the tools that you offer now in a even greater way, what have you learned about how kids are consuming Khan Academy material, either from the kids or from the schools?
There's a whole spectrum. There's a lot of students, a lot of that 20 or 30 million that come every month. They're having trouble understanding a concept. They oftentimes do a web search, or once they get familiar with Khan Academy, they come straight to Khan Academy, and they spend half an hour really going deep on that one topic. And so, in that world, you can view Khan Academy as kind of playing like a tutoring role. But then other students say, it gave me access to a rigorous calculus or physics course that my high school really didn't offer. And that got me college ready, so now I can become an engineering major or a physics major. So you see those kids as well. And then you have the situation where about half of our usage is what we call teacher-directed usage. So this is a teacher using it formally as part of their overall classroom experience, where they're assigning work on Khan Academy, they're asking kids to master a whole unit or master a whole course, and then they're looking at that data, and then they're using that data to do more focused interventions in the classroom.
Yeah. Sal, because you're such a mission-focused organization, I imagine that virtually everybody who works for Khan Academy is motivated by the mission. How are you able to maintain culture and this mission-oriented focus and keep your team motivated, during this time when people are working remotely?
It is uncharted territory. Every other week we get together. Oftentimes every week we get together on video conference, whole company. We talk about what's going on. We try to have a little bit of levity. I and other leaders in the organization try to remind the team about the impact it's having. We read testimonials. Sometimes we even bring on guests or show videos of people who've been impacted. And that makes a huge difference. But to, what we've been discussing, then they'll leave the video conference, and then they're all home alone, and there might be a kid crying in the neighboring room that they need to help them submit their assignments for distance learning. So it's a hard time, and I know it's been very depleting for our team members. And I am also learning on the job in this new normal on how do you keep yourself in the right place. And for me, I've been even pre-COVID, I've been doing a ton of meditation, and the more that I'm in kind of a good mental place, the more that I'm in a good position to help not just my work team, but also in my house, my wife, my kids. Collectively we all have to be in a good place to help each other stay in a good place.
This year has accelerated digital learning and distance learning, whatever you want to call it, probably by leaps and bounds, probably compressed 10 years into this past year, right? What do you imagine this looks like in 2021, 2025?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think 2025 is ironically easier to predict than 2021. Some of the things I hope, and we're going to work towards, is a world where learning and your proof of knowledge is not bound by time or space. And so imagine a world where in 2025, there are mechanisms where, one, all core academic material, any student, either on their own or ideally in conjunction with the classroom, can learn at their own time and pace. And if you get to a certain level of mastery of, say, Algebra 1, there's very easy ways for you to show that you've mastered it, and it's recognized by universities, by employers, by internships. And it's not just Algebra 1. It can apply to coding. It could apply to writing at a certain level. Regardless of how long or how you learned it, what matters is, did you learn it or not? And if you haven't learned it yet, not a big deal. Keep working on it. I hope some things like that are going to be mainstream by 2025.
Sal, I want to ask you to put your parent hat on for a moment and give all of us some advice, because we look to you for guidance here. You've got kids. Your kids are doing digital learning. How are you managing that? How are you making sure that they're not burned out on screens? You know, I think screen time pre-COVID was already a challenge for so many parents, and trying to restrict it or, manage it. Now, for many of us, it's kind of out of control. How are you doing it?
Yeah, I was laughing while you were asking me for advice, because all the time I'm asking, I think I need other people's advice, and I'm going on and trying to find parenting books. So take whatever I have to say with huge grains of salt. I've been very fortunate navigating this. My advice that I've been learning, and I actually heard this from other homeschool parents, is just stick to it and have consistency. Don't put too much stress on yourself, because if you're stressed, the kids are going to feel stress. If your kids are getting, I would say, a core dosage of 20, 30 minutes of math a day, 20, 30 minutes of reading a day, 20, 30 minutes of writing a day, that's all that's really necessary for them to really keep going and to keep growing. And in terms of screen time, all of us are spending more screen time. I mean, even for myself, when I don't have to, I turn off the camera and I go for a walk. And I just tell people, I'm like, I'm actually probably going to pay more attention if you don't see my face and I'm just listening while I'm breathing fresh air and I have blood flowing. And I try to remind that to my kids, and even, suggest that to the school. Like, maybe the kids don't always have to be on camera. And what I think about more is not how much screen. What I think more is, when they are on a screen, how constructive is that screen time? Are they getting reasonable breaks? And the most important thing, are they not losing out on the other very, very important things? Running outside, socializing with friends, time with family, having breaks, etc. So, really making sure they get all of those things.
What do you want to take with you into the future? What do you want Khan Academy to have learned from this year that it will then become a permanent part of the way you work?
Yeah, I hope that this year is a year that, it looks like it is, massively accelerate. First of all, exposure and comfort and awareness of these tools that we have. There's a lot of families, especially low-income families, that don't fully appreciate that these things exist. So one, I think COVID will have accelerated that. I've never seen so much energy by philanthropists, corporations, government to make sure that everyone has at-home access. These are kind of emergency measures during COVID. But I think as we go beyond COVID, these are also very important things that I hope become part of the new normal.
You are an entrepreneur. What advice would you give to small or medium-sized businesses that are dealing with these challenges, a distributed workforce, and how to work efficiently and how to, organize their operations? What advice would you give them from something that you have learned about the way you work this year?
Meditate. I can't overstate how valuable that's been for me to just, I think as an entrepreneur, you always have an infinite number of things to do in a finite amount of time. And I've seen every entrepreneur do it. I have done it. And what you really need to do is make sure you have time and space to recharge yourself. And, maybe it's something different for everyone. Go mountain biking or, sit in a sauna. And when you have that energy and that headspace, that ability to kind of really process things, you're just going to make better decisions. And I think, the more you become a leader and an entrepreneur, you realize that, you're there. Yes, there's a lot of work that you can do directly, but you got to let go of some of that stuff, and that you just got to let the processes unfold. And you do have to have a little bit of a zen mentality for it, and focus on doing the next right action, one foot in front of the other, but don't become too attached to the outcomes, because the outcomes will surprise you, for better or for worse.
Sal Khan, founder of Khan Academy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching The Drop-In, a series exploring the way we work today. I'm Guy Raz, and thanks for dropping in.